Yes, sir, we can start from here.
So, are you making any housekeeping announcements?
Not such, sir. Everything there on mail. So they start from.
Fine. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure and privilege to welcome you all to this webinar on emission control in thermal power plants. All of us are aware that air pollution is a topic which has a lot of prominence and importance these days, and the thermal power stations are a contributor to the air pollution. In this background, we have tried to organize this webinar today on this topic, which is of thematic interest. And today we have a very distinguished panel with us, Mr. R.V. Shahi, Mr. A.S. Bakshi, Mr. Ajay Shankar, Mr. B.C. Malik, Mr. Vijay Meghani, Mr. Girish Kardam, and Mr. Vikas Mehta. All these panelists come from different backgrounds, from different areas, sectors, and the experience which they bring in. I think that will be of a lot of interest to the audience. With these opening remarks, I hand it over to Mr. Shahi to start the proceedings. Over to you, Shahi, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Saxena. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Fine.
Thanks for this invitation. Some time back, you spoke to me and I said this is a very important, very relevant subject for the power sector, and then the premier institution on the subject and on all energy-related issues they are organizing. It is thoughtful. Climate change concerns, pollution control, environmental issues associated with thermal power plants, they are all well known. In fact, thermal plants have dominated the scene in terms of debates and discussion on emission control. And progressively, the regulatory institutions, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, they have been upgrading the requirements in terms of how efficient for emission control our thermal power plants should be. There was a time when thermal plants, in fact, were the most important and dominant source of power supply in the country. Even today they are. But then now with changing technologies, disruptions in power generation processes technologically, we are getting more options. Of late, renewables in terms of solar and wind, I wouldn't say they are dominating the scene in terms of a significant portion of power generation. But then the way they are moving forward, we seem to be getting good options to take care of pollution control, emission control issues in power plants. The latest debate on the subject has been about the new norms which the Ministry of Environment and Forest have brought out, and there are several views. There is absolutely no doubt that if the technologies can provide, we should be as latest as possible. The question in India always has been affordability of power in terms of its price. Even today, as I said, that power generation from coal-based thermal power plants is the biggest contributor of power in the country. Our dependence is huge. In terms of capacity, out of 375,000 megawatt approximately that we have, more than 200,000 megawatt capacity power plants are from the coal-based thermal group. So obviously, this issue has come under the debate because these power plants are under pressure financially. Many of them are now financially stressed. Quite substantial portion of NPAs are also being contributed mostly by the thermal power plants which have come up recently or are in the process of coming up. Many of them on the matter of power generation cost are being dispatched out. They are not being asked to dispatch. I think April-August figure, if I remember, the overall average plant load factor is less than 50%. Of course, part of the region is
450 mg per nm cube, and the notification of the revised norms is under process. Now, with the new limits, practically all the power plants will be able to achieve the norms with the combustion modification with the help of secondary overfired air provided in the boilers. NTPC has also carried out the pilot tests on a number of plants, trying out different reagents in various plants, and the results of these tests, as and when they come out, will add value and learning to the plants which are yet to take this forward. When we move over to next slide, we find that what are the policy and regulatory development which have taken place in this domain. And next slide, please. So we all know that CRC has already recognized the new environmental terms as change in law. And Mr. Shahi has already covered a few points which are listed in the slide, that there will be impact on the merit order dispatch of the power plants which do it because of the higher operating costs. The additional capital expenditure which will come on account of the new pollution control equipment will add to the cost of power and the tariff. And the CPCB is also doing the monitoring of critically polluted areas, which is a enabler or a indicator of how we should be moving forward in this regard. On the next slide, we have tried to capture the key concerns which are there, which we have gathered from the stakeholder consultation. Now, first issue which comes to the mind is, will the current pace of FGD bidding and installation, will it meet the desired target date? If not, what measures could be suggested for timely compliance, given the practical conditions we have? The second point which comes to the mind is that what are the real or perceived issues or challenges which come in the way of implementation of these FGD systems, whether they relate to the technology, whether they require to equipment supply or implementation, is there a regulatory certainty issue, ability of the DISCOMs to recover the ability of the GENCOs to recover this, and ability of the DISCOMs to recover the dues as part of tariff from the end consumers, whether financing is an issue. These are the 4 or 5 points which come to mind and which need to be discussed and deliberated. A new challenge which has come in the form of COVID-19, whether it is making the compliance more challenging, whether in regard to the equipment supply or whether it required to the time, whether we need more time to comply with them. Now, one point which we have been contemplating and thinking in TERI is whether the factoring of cost of emissions in the energy charges will be helpful in the merit order dispatch, in the revised modified merit order dispatch. The merit order dispatch doesn't take place merely on the marginal cost of generation, but also the emission cost is added to that. This is one point which needs to be discussed as we move forward. And keeping all these points in mind, what could be the way forward is the last point which we have kept as a part of discussion. So with this, I think we have tried to flag the issues which are there in our mind and which we have gathered through the stakeholder consultation. And I would now request Mr. Shahi to take us through the panel discussion, inviting the panelists from who are there with us today. So over to you, Shahi, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Saxena. May I now request Mr. Baxi or Mr. Malik, I mean whoever, Mr. Baxi, Mr. Baxi was chairman CA and he was on the CERC as a member. I think his association with the subject has been extensive. We would like to share the benefit of his wisdom on this occasion. Mr. Baxi.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar. I had attended the last one also in I think probably it was held in February. And at that point also, these issues were widely deliberated. Issues more or less remain the same as they were 9 months back. Sir, most of the most important issues are with regard to SOX and water norms. NOx is NOx technology, emission control technology is in nascent stage, and these norms may have to be relaxed for Indian power plants. So in the context of FGD, sir, I had raised this point at that time also that manufacturers are not going to set up manufacturing shop in India for FGD plants because this is one-time order only and they are not going to get repeat orders on this. So they are only going to import equipment from outside and that will increase the lead time. And that's what many of the manufacturers had agreed to at that time, that yes, lead time would be quite high. This is one point which is leading to the increased time being taken for implementation. Second was the sequential implementation. You cannot shut down a large number of plants because that will affect the power supply situation. So that was the second point which was taken, and on the basis of that, say, a priority list had also been divided. Third is with regard to state and private sector plants. Central sector plants relatively have deeper pockets and have better access to debt, so they will be able to, and they are generally complying with the government instructions in a better way than state and other plants. Private sectors plants have their own issues. Many private sector plants have part PPAs, and they don't know how they will recover the cost. They do not even have full PPAs, and their cost of power, because most of them are selling at exchange, the cost of power will become very high for those who implement this FGD and other measures. So they are in a fix how they would recover this cost. And bankability is also another issue with private projects because banks are not willing to give any loans to them. So these were the issues that were raised at that time also. Even in thermal, sir, central sector plants, there are two issues because their PLF is coming down. In any case, the first cost per unit of electricity has already gone up. So added to it is the cost of FGDs and other pollution control equipment. This will increase the cost of power substantially, maybe about 1 rupee or something. So that adds to the troubles of the DISCOMs. That issue was also raised, particularly the plants which are older, sir, whose remaining life is say 7 years or 8 years. If we implement these measures, then the cost has to be recovered within a period of 6-7 years, and that increases the cost substantially. So this is another issue which was being deliberated in CERC. I don't know whether they have taken any view on it right now or not. Up to what age of plants this FGD would be implemented, and others would be requested to be exempted from this requirement. Third was merit order dispatch, which Mr. Saxena has also raised. Yes, sir. After some plants have implemented this FGD or other measures, they would go lower on merit order dispatch because of higher running costs also. So at that time, idea was mooted that this cost would be kept out while calculating the variable cost of the plants for the purpose of merit order dispatch. This was another issue, sir, that was agreed at that time. So I just saw a question being raised by Mr. Sooni. I think it had popped up. At that time also, when I was in CRC, he had raised this issue that in this SCED, Security Constrained Economic Dispatch, presently the dispatch is based on the variable cost only. He had mooted the idea that the dispatch should be based on the emissions and not on the variable cost. So even now he has, I think, mooted this question whether emission control parameter should be the basis for dispatch of power. But I think that could be considered only after a substantial number of power plants have implemented the equipment. with the position being as it is, only 1% of the power plants have implemented FGD. Consideration of such SE, this security constrained economic dispatch based on based on emission control parameter will not be possible, sir. That is one point. Sir, another point I would like to say is that controlling the particulate matter is relatively easy. That's why the progress on ESP's implementation is quite good. The problem is mainly in FGD, and that will take some time. I think this limit of this 2022 limit is not likely to be met. So it will need at least another 4 years to implement this FGD, and government will have to come up with many new ideas of cajoling, promoting, helping state and private sector power plants to install these emission control equipment. So they had collected a lot of money from coal cess, green cess or something. Why is not part of that money being diverted to implementation of these this equipment, which is very essential, considered very essential, especially when banks are in not coming forward to finance these activities. So these are, sir, my view. I have come, sir. This finalization of technology is another thing which we have been telling CEA to do. They should decide now that at which power plant, which technology is the most appropriate, wet type FGD or dry type FGD, depending upon the cost, availability of water, and other parameters, and the availability of space, etc. I think they have not so far done it. So that's why CERC is also not in a position to benchmark the costs of FGDs, etc. This is another thing that needs to be done, sir. I think, sir, these are the points I just wanted to raise. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bakshi. Lot of good points. Some of the issues that this is quite a revolutionary concept that dispatch should be based on emission, compliance to emission, not on the cost of power. That would ensure better compliance. But obviously the cost burden on the discoms, they will, if you take discom view, they will say they should get the cheapest power. So that's and then the point that I also made in the opening remarks, what has happened to the coal cess, where has that money gone, one doesn't know. Neither it is being used for clean coal technology nor for anything else. And finally, it has become part of, I think, general tax and then it is a pass-through by the generators to the distribution companies. So that's what the situation is. But one, I think, when we get the presentation from the CEA, Mr. Malik, one point should be elaborated a little more, because in some of the discussions that I was not a speaker, but I was listening to this. Quite often, right from many years back, we used to hear that Indian coal does not have so much of sulfur that we should be so much concerned about this. There is one viewpoint. Of course, when you do imported coal in our power plants, depending on what type of coal you are sourcing, sulfur becomes a very relevant issue. But Indian coal doesn't have a good amount of sulfur, is an issue which many of the people have been voicing concern. In that context, wherever FGD has been installed in a plant where domestic coal is being used, what was the situation before the FGD has been installed, and what is the situation after FGD has been installed? That point, I think, need to be clarified, because some question will come, and as I said, that I have heard in some of the discussion of a thing. So with that, may I request Mr. Malik from Central Electricity Authority. Of course, we heard Mr. Bakshi. We have the advantage with Mr. Bakshi of Regulatory Commission's point of view when he was there. and also advantage of his having been in Central City Authority for a long time, including at the level of chairman. So I think now let's hear Mr. Bakshi, what is the latest about this? And it would be nice if he could cover this point that I made, that domestic coal, extent of sulfur, use of technology, does it make a significant change, etc., etc. Thank you, Mr. Malik.
Thank you, sir. I am coming to that point about Indian coal. Indian coal actually comparatively have less sulfur content. It is about 0.35 to 3% to 4.45%. So, but still it is emission is up to 1200 mg per NMQ. So our limit is 600 mg per NMQ for old plant. For new plant, it is further less. So FGD is required to limit the as per the requirement of the this MOF guidelines. Our thermal capacity is about 205 gigawatt. Out of that, about 170 gigawatt phasing plan has been prepared in consultation with states, central and private, and CPCB has approved that phasing plan, 170 gigawatt. Another 10 gigawatt newly commissioned unit is also under implementation of this FGD. And another CFBC boiler is there where it is not required. Some of the units are identified for retirement. So out of 205 gigawatt, only 170 plus 10, 180 gigawatt has been phasing plan, means FGD is under implementation. Out of that, I have the more small correction what Saxena sir has shown in his presentation. It is the total 38% already bid awarded out of 169. That is 170 gigawatt, 38% bid awarded. About it is 65 gigawatt, and bid opened for this LOA about another 21 gigawatt. So we expect that within 3-4 months, maybe it may be LOA may be awarded. So 50% bid award will be taken place. Now coming to the Sox Control Technology, various technologies there. That is most popular is the DSI and wet FGD. Well, another technology is the dry solvent injection, semi-dry. But power plants are going for the mainly wet FGD. Dry solvent is the another technology is there for old plant or whose life is very less, less than 5 or 7 years. Then we can use for this. But what happened? That is in Dadri we have already implemented that one. But after that, the cost almost doubled. In Hardwaganj, they are going for that one, but in bidding process, they have increased the cost almost double what they have offered in Dadri. So it is not implementing in India. Only wet FGD is preferred here. This is also one of the cause. We are CA are in the CA is telling that suppose any plant technology should be plant specific. What is the coal they are receiving? What is the their space availability and the life of the plant? Everything have to be considered, and overall life cycle cost have to be prepared. On the basis of the life cycle cost, they have to select the technology. About NOx control, in NOx control, we have combustion modification, SCR technology and SNCR technology. For old plant, because combustion modification 300 mg per NM2 norms cannot be achieved. So that norms have been revised to 450. In NTPC, some plant SCR technology was tested, pilot test was conducted, and SNCR in 2 plant was also conducted. But that was not successful. We have seen that 100 mg per NM2 cannot be achieved on continuous basis. And what the SCR operation is heavily dependent on the inlet flue gas temperature, that is the 300 to 380 degrees centigrade. Which cannot be achieved when our load is below 70 to 80%. That is one issue. Another is the mechanical life of the catalyst. Normally it is the 60,000 hour, but during the test it has been found that after 8,000, in between 8 to 16,000, their life is already over. So, and huge amount of disposal of catalyst will be required due to mechanical life and this high ash content of the coal. Contamination of fly ash due to ammonia and other component in SCR technology also to be looked into. And anhydrous ammonia is a hazardous material that requires special permission. These issues are there. So one committee is constituted in CPCB, CA, and NTPC. They are looking after this issue. What should be the way out? It will be that limit to be again revised to 450, or it will be 100. That is, that committee is looking after that. Now coming to the reason for delay. Why this delay is happening? Because it is the new technology and lack of operational expertise in the market, and with power utilities, especially in state sector. Another thing is the limited capability of the vendors, sub-vendors to supply FGD. Only 5 or 6 vendors is there in India, and 1 year is required for T-construction phase. For suppose pre-feasibility, before NIT, 1 year is required to study the what type of technology we have to select, and the space is there or not, like this. After that, NIT, then after LOA, another 30 months is required for construction. It is the one of because FGD is a huge thing. It is a rotating type of plant. It is itself a big plant. And so total time is required 3.5 years, starting from the feasibility study to the commissioning of the FGD. Another thing is the MOEF come up with the several clarification in the norms in 2018 June only, like chimney height, what should be the chimney height, what to the water consumption, what is the measurement process, like 6% oxygen or 12% oxygen, like this. This modification came in the amendment came in the 2018 June only. Then after that, this NIT started only that, because the in design that chimney height, water consumption, and this measurement of 6% oxygen is also have the effect in the design of in the FGD. So this is the one of the cause that thermal power plant in NCR region all are this only 1.5 years given, so that they in 2019 December they could not complete it. Instead of 3.5 years, they have they given only 1.5 years. Then the capacity constraints. One is the capacity available in the country. Limited vendors is there. Their capacity is heavily booked, and there is a now huge gap in demand and supply. Suppose initially that wet FGD cost was about 45 lakhs per megawatt. But today it is coming to 75 lakhs per megawatt due to this demand and supply gap only. Then increased delivery time. When suppliers overbooking their capacity and providing the equipment in increasing the time. Then financing issue also, change in law, investment approval, regulatory commission, that issue also is there. Huge capex is there. About, I told that 170 gigawatt existing capacity, 10 gigawatt running, and another 58 gigawatt is under construction. So total about 236 gigawatt. If we take average 55 lakhs per megawatt, that is it is coming about 1 lakh 30 crores investment. Now, another issue is this COVID pandemic. For that, we have already lost 6 to 7 months. And recently, another issue is the restriction imposed in the import from China. Actually, FGD, as on date, about 30% equipment is being imported from outside India. That 30%, out of that 30%, about 80% is importing from China only. Now that restriction, that also causing the serious effect on the timely implementation of FGD. So recently we conducted a meeting with all vendors. What is the way out? If restriction is there, we asked them to import from the Europe, Japan, or USA. What will the effect on price? They stated that it may increase the price 15 to 20% overall. But the question is the availability. If we like to increase the cost, still we cannot have the this huge requirement cannot be met from the except China. So timeline has to be extended. Another proposal from CA was submitted already in ministry. Why not we go for the location-based specific norms for this thermal power plant? As on date, what MOF has given that norms is same for all over the country. Suppose in one place ambient air quality is already in good, so we don't need to implement their FGD immediately. We need to implement FGD immediately in critically polluted area where the ambient air quality, where SO2 limit is more than the prescribed value, that is 0 to 40 microgram per mm2 as per the this MOA is good. So there we should not use this FGD immediately. So we can implement this FGD in graded manner by 10 to 15 years, so that we have categorized the plant in five regions. Suppose where plant ambient air quality, where plant is about more than 40 microgram, there we immediately install, and 30 to 40, between 30 to 40 microgram, we can implement FGD in second phase after 1 year of the commissioning of the first phase, so that we can see what is the performance of the FGD implemented there. And for the level 3, where ambient air quality is 20 microgram to 30, and then 10 to 20 and 0 to 10. This is in this category, 3 category, that FGD implementation is presently not required. That is the thing we have already submitted this report to MOP. So and proposed for the 10 to 15 years phasing this installation period. Okay, thank you, sir.
Very good, Mr. Malik. I think you have made some very important observations, and also the point that something has been initiated to make it more practical for implementation, because you have said that 80% of the import of equipment is from China, and with the latest approach that how much of it could be allowed from China, obviously, if you depend on European and American market, the cost will be high. So obviously, we have to be. So this idea of categorization of critical areas and less critical areas and general areas, how do we phase out the? These are the things which should have been, in fact, thought right in the beginning. These big changes. This is I see across the sectors. Such big changes are planned, and we become so one-sided sometimes and so much sentimental about certain thing, or maybe dogmatic about certain thing, that implementation aspects we do not consider. If our ability in the country is limited in terms of manufacturing, has been limited, it is not that it is today limited. And then if we also don't want to have too much of dependence on import because our foreign exchange concerns will be there, and then we put a blanket sort of emission norm for everywhere, do it in certain time frames. What happened? I chaired the revised guidelines on the coal wastage, and finally that has been sort of withdrawn. It was for earlier for 1,000 kilometers, then it was changed to 500 kilometers, and now we have come to the conclusion that no, we need not insist on coal wastage at all. So one of the clean coal technologies even go by. I think these are things, these changes are, whether it is regulatory commission or government, I think everywhere it has to be considered very carefully. And now you see some of the things that you have said is eye openers. I mean, the cost will be like this. And from the presentations made by Mr. Saxena right in the beginning, I think that central sector has already bid for bid awarded 81%. Obviously, central sector is well placed because most of the central sector projects are cost plus. So for them, absolutely, though it doesn't matter others also, but change in law has its own time implication in terms of being passed on, the benefit being passed on to generators. All the stakeholders taken into account and doing it. Obviously, I think it is good that this paper has been moved to the ministry, and I don't know how ministry takes it up with the authorities. There is a need, and also the coal cess point Mr. Baxi made, I also made that point, that the huge amount came out of the coal cess, which is now changed to tax, and that amount is not either passed on to a strengthening of transmission system, nor is it passed on to clean coal technologies, nor is it passed on to these environmental norms to be applied, in which case finally power sector distribution, and of course they have other inefficiency also to handle. But one of the problem is also that we keep on passing almost any and everything to the distribution sector, and then finally that becomes such a stressed asset, bankrupt, that quality of supply suffers. I think there are many issues involved, and that in the beginning, that's why I made that point. That if it is a conference on pollution control, there will be one type of trend of discussion. If it is a thermal plant, there will be another type of discussion. If there is something else, financing, then another type of discussion. We don't take holistic view, irrespective of the nature of conference that we discuss on. So I think with that now, I think we have one more very eminent panelist, Mr. Ajay Shankar is there. Mr. Saxena?
Yes, sir, he's there.
Mr. Ajay Shankar, may I request you? Mr. Ajay Shankar has been long with power sector in the power ministry itself, and he was a very valuable colleague. We worked together and did many things. I think, do we have the benefit of your wisdom, Ajay?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me begin by saying that the current situation is a bit embarrassing because the regulatory requirement has been there, so it's a part of the law or the rules. And clearly we are nowhere near compliance, and from the discussion it appears that it will be some years before we'll be in compliance. And if the CA recommendation is accepted, then the regulations would change and maybe the position on compliance will become a little better. But the experience that we've had so far, I think leads me to a somewhat different line of thinking. And which is that if we are to proceed on something as big as this, in the normal manner of a feasibility study plant by plant and a bid invited plant by plant, and therefore all the constraints that there is no manufacturing capacity in the country, the business case for creating it doesn't exist, it has to be imported by the vendors who are all dependent on China. And the result is that the lead time is for the bids is rising. So if you go to the market today, vendors will presumably quote a much longer lead time. And the price has already gone up from 40 lakhs a megawatt to about 70 lakhs a megawatt. So something as big as this probably needs a different approach altogether. And an approach to the probably of the older planned economy way of doing things in an emergency. So it should have been, and it should still be possible for us to say identify the key imported ingredient, place a bulk order for whatever 50, 60, 70,000 megawatts for which orders have not been placed, divide it between existing Indian vendors who do some local value addition, whether it is BHL, L&T, etc., arrive at some, price for the entire lot at 40 lakhs a megawatt, 50 lakhs a megawatt, or whatever it is, and place all the orders at one go, and you crash the time for execution as well as the cost. Because bulk procurement always leads to lowering of costs. The ESL has demonstrated it dramatically through the LED bulb program. So this is a program large enough, 1,30,000 crores, is a large enough volume of business to get the best technology, the best plant, and get lower costs. So I would still suggest that it is worth looking and thinking along these lines, irrespective of what view the ministry takes in consultation on ME or CC on extending the timeline or segregating the regulatory requirement on the basis of geography. But surely there is a case for reversing the existing process of execution and doing some bulk procurement, getting lower prices, apportioning it amongst different bidders in an old-fashioned planned economy way, and completing the task on time. There are two other kinds of ideas or thoughts that have been going through my mind. One is that the CA has already identified some power plants for closure. Now, this was done even before the FGD costs were being factored in. So I think it is the right time to take a very hard-headed cost-benefit analysis at the national level and say that these are very old plants. Let us not invest in FGD in them, let us close them, because there will be no problem for the country, because we have excess capacity. And we have some more capacity in the pipeline through the stressed assets, which are getting resolved. And the demand has fallen due to COVID and is not likely to rise in the next 2 years. So why not take a more aggressive and immediate view on identifying power plants where orders for FGD have not been placed and see whether we should close them? Why place orders for a plant which should live only for 5-7 years? Or why place orders for a plant where the heat rate is anyway too high and the marginal cost is high? So why not do an aggressive tabletop exercise and have a much bigger list of closure of power plants? It would do the economy a lot of good because the NPA problems would get resolved. And the fact of the matter is that whether the DISCOM is paying for it or not, any power plant that is commissioned, the people of India are paying for it. So they're paying for it either through the banks which have given loans or those who put in equity or the banks which are taking haircuts. So again, a planned centralized view on this issue with some more vigor is what I would suggest and advocate, because instead of 5,000 megawatts, you could go up to 10,000 or 20,000 megawatts for closure, because I remember years ago, I used to take the view that all power plants which have the vintage prior to BHS getting the German technology should all be closed down because they're all terribly inefficient. I remember looking at R&M and discussing with the best technical people, and they said you can never improve upon the design heat rate because it's an old plant. So no matter what you spend, you will get 10, 15, 20% less than the design heat rate. So I think that is one suggestion I have. The other suggestion takes this line of reasoning further, and it flows from what CA has suggested, that let us look at air sheds where pollution levels are high. Now there, if the pollution levels are high, and we will spend this in the FGD, then why not take a more stricter view about closing plants in this area on priority and in a more aggressive way? Because say if the air ambient quality is poor today in an area which is now industrialized or urbanized or is growing very fast, like the NCR, then no matter what we do, the ambient air quality in the coming years will get worse due to other reasons, not the power plant. So why not take a futuristic view and identify plants in the regions like the NCR, where instead of now placing an order for FGD, why not take a view for closing down the plant? And again, I'm saying all this in the knowledge that overall the country has 30,000-40,000 megawatts of coal-fired stations, either under construction or commissioned and running on very low PLF, in which are very efficient in terms of technology. They're all supercritical plants. So why not have another aggressive exercise on deciding to close down power plants in the areas which are highly polluted or likely to become highly polluted in the next few years? Because one great, I think, misfortune of this country has been that we have been very slow in recognizing the problem of air pollution. So if one were to be really brutally frank and honest, then we have a health emergency on the point because of air pollution. We are being criminal to ourselves and not acting more aggressively in getting rid of air pollution, because the health costs are very high, but more than the avoidable health costs for adults, the health costs of children are far too high and irreversible. So I think treating air pollution as a national emergency is overdue. And so when we look at costs and benefits and of closure of plants in areas which are suffering from air pollution very highly, as the NCR is, or other areas which will suffer in the years to come as urbanization increases, as industrialization increases. So we should take a more aggressive look at closing these older plants and focus all the investment on FGD in the newer plants. And for the newer plants, the private sector has a genuine problem. As was pointed out by Mr. Bakshi, that many of them don't have PPAs. Many of them are already having difficulty repaying debt. So here there is a good case for, again, a planned approach that the Power Finance Corporation or the RC or whatever will fund this fully because it's a regulatory requirement. And we will see how the state regulator, the central regulator of the power system takes care of the repayment burden. So instead of saying that I will look at your viability and your revenue flows to see whether I can give you this 50 lakhs per megawatt, you become part of the centralized planned way of execution. And this money you will get from PFC. Maybe after all, government is guaranteeing so much of loans for MSMEs and for DISCOMs. So it can easily guarantee this set of loans, and it's a stimulus for the economy because at least Indian vendors will get business, create some jobs and so on. So this is my thoughts. Again, I'll summarize very briefly. A planned approach for bulk procurement for whatever is imported, price fixation, apportionment against vendors, so that you can implement the program aggressively without seeing rising costs and increasing time. A more aggressive program of identifying power plants for closure just from the cost-benefit analysis. And then another layer to, or another way of identifying some more plants on the grounds that they are in highly polluting areas from the point of view of air pollution. And therefore public health warrants their closure. Because now many people are agreed that plant should have been closed 10 years back or 15 years back. So we shouldn't have a discussion around like this 5, 7, 8 years down the road about some other plant which is in a highly polluted Thank you. We can't hear you, Mr. Shahi. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I said, Ajay, number of very useful and practical suggestions. I was asking Saxena whether we have any more panelists to share the view.
Yes, sir. I think we have Mr. Meghani from the CERC and Mr. Girish Kadam from the ICRA and Vikas Mehta from SED Fund who was to join. I hope, Vikas, have you joined? So till the time we are able to get a confirmation about joining of Mr. Vikas, we can either request Mr. Meghani, Chief of Engineering at CERC, or Mr. Girish Kadam, the financial expert from the ICRA.
So we can ask our chief engineer from CERC, because we discussed about CEA. Let's have the CERC. That would be great.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shahi, Mr. Ajay Saxena, and our Honorable Mr. Bakshi for sharing their valuables. And I will also thank the TERI to initiate this very important discussion, because my staff in CRC told me that after the TERI published their paper in February 2020 about the issues for the FGD implementation, they have taken a lot of clues from your paper in framing the regulation, which has been first amendment of CRC tariff regulation, and the staff consultation paper for the IPPs for providing the FGD. Here I am both as a CA man, as a CRC man, and more as an activist, because during last 5 years we are hearing a lot about FGD, and since 2017 we are participating and discussing with all the states how this needs to be implemented. The issue is, I will start from the first slide of Mr. Ajay Saxena. The slide started from the high pollution area. Here I want to say one thing. In any process called objective-oriented management or objective-oriented programming, what is my objective? My objective is output control. Here the pollution is being measured, high pollution is PM 2.5 high pollution. It is not high SO2 pollution. What has happened, the Pollution Control Board of India, instead of monitoring the pollution, is starting to monitor the installation of FGD. All the penalty which has been imposed recently has been imposed just because they have not installed the FGD without measuring actual pollution at that location. CA has very lightly pointed out that the location specific pollution, if I see, I will give you one surprising data. If we go by the suggestion of CA, my priority area of FGD decreased from 167,000 megawatt to only 7,600 megawatt. So it is a very critical issue of how we are prioritizing the implementation. They have clearly shown that in which area the pollution is more and where we need to make the measurement of pollution, whether at the chimney height at the surface, what method we will use, whether it will be annual average, monthly average, daily peak or average, or it will be a very strict real-time measurement. We are following the international regulation without thinking whatever the measurement policy they have adopted. So for first 3 years, we have no measuring criteria. That if after installation of FGD, I want to see the benefit, how I will measure the benefit. It is only after 3 years and environment pollution norms that have defined the measurement criteria. In any monitoring criteria, measurement is most important. And I will start by one special thing about Mr. Shahi. Except Mr. Shahi, no other engineers have good negotiation skill. I will give you one example, how this regulation or Ministry of Environment norms came up with. CA taken as a very strong position that due to low sulfur position, it is not required. There was a strong vocal lobby which is saying it is very much required because China has done, Germany has done, everybody has done. So during this extreme position, what has happened? Some norms which has come, which has not taken issue of implementation. If at that time we have to consider the implementation issue, I will give you one example of China. China taken from 1993 to till today, about only 80% of the plant has been covered by FGD. And now, after Germany has adopted renewable model, America has adopted a renewable model, we have no much supplier available for FGD installation. Whenever I get a query on Twitter, only a Chinese company was seeking how much installation is happening in India. And why the central government and state government has a lot of difference. In every RPC forum, whenever stakeholders were asked, they are ready to follow this FGD now, but they have no money to implement. I give you one example. Rajasthan Power Generation Corporation Limited, if you want to implement FGD in Kota Thermal Power Station, first you will need money, and there will be a stream of energy tariff which has to be cover the revenue stream. He told me that around 25,000 crore rupees of liability he is having from 3 DISCOM. So by 3 DISCOM having a liability of 25,000 crore, where is the money to invest? And I am surprised to know, and I am surprised to hear today only I have also attended one other meeting. Our major contributor, CA, Ministry of Power, they are aware about this problem, but they are not telling this problem openly to the Supreme Court only due to fear of contempt. The problem is that our engineers have properly analyzed how much finance is required and how this finance was required. When CRC sent people to the CA to get the benchmark cost, whether the benchmark cost is available. We have one experiment in power grid benchmarking. Even after 300 assets, we are not able to reach a benchmark. But at that time, there was only one bid, 1 or 2 bid of bulk purchase from NTPC. Some benchmark was framed around 45,000. And now within 2 years, we are in the problem that it is 70 lakh. So how a state fellow can plan the costing of this FGD investment? And then come the issues of technology. We are still not clear how the gypsum will be disposed, how the calcium CaCO4 will be sourced. There are no information available in the public domain. So last month we have started in CA to give the every information transparently. We are having all information about the FGD process available transparently to every month. So every month the report is being published, and you will peculiarly see the central government plans are going ahead, but state people and IPP are not doing. And all are known problems since last 3-4 years, that the regulatory certainty was not there, how they will get the finance and how this finance cost will be recovered. Simply saying change in law and change in law implementing in the simple order of direction of Ministry of Power to the regulator, it is not feasible. We have to see the stakeholder concern also. Now consider the case of DISCOM. Last year, about 7% of incremental power demand in the country came only from the incremental RE. Leave the total RE. All the new RE plants just supplied 70% of incremental demand in the country. So all the DISCOMs are facing enough pressure from both sides. It cannot be that I will make the policy, I will take the credit, but arrange the resources yourself. So if the central government actually want to implement any initiative in environment, they should be hand in hand in supporting the finance, technology, monitoring, supporting at the every level. It cannot be done just by holding some review meeting or just taking some Excel monitoring sheet. What is happening? Every 3 months or 6 months, we ask the state fellow what they have done. They just move step one ahead, like bidding, or they have called the bidding analysis happening in 1 year. So whatever issues are coming, that has been summarized in the last slide of Mr. Ajay Saxena very nicely. One are the issues of technology, then come the issue of regulatory certainty, and then come the merit order issue. Ministry of Power has already issued that this cost will not be considered in the merit portion. But why not start with ourselves? Let us then security constant energy dispatch in central government plan. Let us implement a weightage of environment cost also. So let us see how much is the response of the state. It will not develop the total cost of the power for NTPC plant. It will just an experiment that how much power at the what cost can be absorbed. In John Hopkins University, there was a study that whenever we press too hard to the states on merit order, etc., up to 90% they will follow, but they have good measures, or around 10% deviation will do. So can we make them implement the regulation or rules honestly, or we are pressurizing them too much to deviate from them. So we have to sit together with them that how much power, how much absorbed cost they can absorb. Then the issues of this COVID crisis has come. But before COVID crisis also, there was not much vendor available in India. And why they were not available? Because they also want a certainty of investment, like consider the solar manufacturer. If I am not able to give them visibility of 15-year or 25-year order, why they will come? Similarly, even when the process is just started, now come concept of Make in India. In Make in India, there is a problem to get the order issued to the China. So even after all the activity, order cannot be issued. So all these problems should be transparently told to the our all regulator, Supreme Court, and if we say it politely, without seeking confrontation, because another lobby is very strong, and we are also convinced that the environmental compliance is very much necessary. Like Mr. Ajay Shankar said, we are all for environment, but in environment also we need to prioritize whether I will want to control first PM 2.5 or whether we want to control SO2 or NO2. Consider the case of CA. Within 2 years, CA was able to convince Supreme Court that NOx parameter can be increased from 300 to 450. So it is a matter of convincing the people with good data and good analytics. And the way forward, which is as suggested by Mr. Ajay Shankar sir, let us stop and pause for 3 months. Analyze the capability of states, total cost implications, and then give a good order, good procurement order with a big purchase order, but with the compliance. So the CRC has designed the regulations, First Amendment, and also the staff paper. This is a good incentive inbuilt to make the compliance assured. The Prayas Foundation has very much praised for the CRC staff paper, that we have tried to balance the stakeholder concern as well as the generator concern about the recovery of financing of the project as well as the stream of the revenue. And it is not giving benefit to anybody, like no additional ROE is being allowed for new investment in FGD. Only the fixed cost will be covered through a debt mechanism. This may be a problematic for few people which are not getting investment, but it is trying to a balancing activity. So all the activity like on these all issues, instead of taking an extreme position that we will do it or we will not do it, let us plan in a realistic manner. And I will request honestly to the CA people, whatever good you speak to in the webinar, kindly have the courage to speak before the Ministry of Power, because you are representing all the stakeholders. You are not representing the Ministry of Power. We have day in, day out, we are discussing with the DISCOM, and they are giving us all honest input. So let us be honest to give this data to the Ministry of Power and make our case very strong through good data and good implication, that how much in the next 5 year implication is there. He has already conducted an study that 14,000 megawatt plant will be decommissioned if their heat rate is worse than 2600. So, but what is happening? Planning fellows input is not going to the thermal fellow input. Thermal fellow is going independently. Grid operation fellow is going independently. So in 2017 with RPC, with the consultation of stakeholder, we have successful in getting a schedule. But this schedule is not being implemented because we are not able to solve their basic problem of technology, good pricing, good finance availability, and even PFC and REC, which are ready to support everybody. But there is no application is coming for FGD installation because nobody is seeing that how it will be benefit or how it will be sold. So unless we are all agree its benefit, cost, we cannot force people to absorb the cost only through a central dictate. Their participation is very much necessary. And from CRC side, we are also trying to consult everybody while making regulation, and similarly to impacts upon Ministry of Power, that optimum utilization of resources need to be there instead of just sticking to particular deadlines. And if possible, we can convince everybody, CA people with whom I am interacting, CA engineers will be able to convince everybody and anybody that how much feasibility is there and how they can move in this direction with all stakeholders involved. Thank you.
think some very new thoughts, and then I think your suggestion to CEA and Ministry of Power and the difficulties the DISCOMs are facing, consultation with the stakeholders. I think they're all very, very useful suggestions. We will discuss this. May I, with that, request Girish? Girish, is he there?
Yes, Mr. Shai. Good afternoon.
You are most welcome. Please.
So thank you, Mr. Shai and Mr. Saxena. Myself, Girish Kumar Kadam, I represent ICRA. Let me just briefly introduce ICRA if, for the panel members and other audience. ICRA is a credit rating agency, provides credit rating opinion on corporates. In fact, ICRA has a wide coverage on number of rated entities in the power and the renewable space across the value chain, including DENCOs, TRANSCOs, and DISCOMs. In fact, ICRA, along with other rating agencies, jointly have done the MOP ranking exercise for a number of years in the past for state-owned distribution utilities as well. And I lead the power and renewable sector vertical, both for ratings and research assignments at ICRA. So that's in brief about ICRA and myself. Now, in the panel discussion so far, we have discussed a number of topics at length, which have been impacting the progress of emission control systems for the thermal generators so far. I have observations and few points to make out here on 3-4 areas. First, I will cover on the cost impact, both for the GENCOs and also the tariff implications for the DISCOMs in particular. Given the fact that the financial health of the state DISCOMs is quite poor, and that's a matter of concern for everybody in the power sector. Two, I will also briefly touch upon the regulatory clarity and certainty aspect, which is utmost required for everyone in the power sector entity as far as FGD implementation is concerned. And finally, I will touch upon the financing environment and the apprehensions from the lending community as we see in terms of interactions with various issuers who have FGD compliance requirements. Firstly, on the cost impact, based on our understanding, the capital cost impact, for emission control systems, taking care of FGD, SOx, and NOx, would be anywhere in the range of 0.8 to 1 crore per megawatt. And that itself would lead to, impact on the cost of generation on a levelized basis to the extent of 22 to 25 paisa per unit for a generator, right? And that's a sizable impact, from the cost perspective. In turn, it has a consequent impact on the tariff implications for the ultimate off-takers. Now, the ultimate off-takers are nothing but the state-owned distribution utilities, right? Even if we have to adjust this cost impact, this is the coal-based generation in all India level, which is about 70% currently. And if we have to adjust this cost impact also for the 18C loss level in the country, the impact on the cost of power supply for the state-owned distribution entities would be anywhere in the range of 22 to 25 paisa per unit, which corresponds to almost 3 to 3.5% tariff required, for the state DISCOMs on an aggregate all India level. And that's the kind of a tariff impact which we are talking of. If, let's say, these FGD units were to be implemented on a pan-India basis for 169 gigawatt of, the projects which have been identified by the CA so far. So the impact is sizable. Now, in that context, let me talk about the regulatory clarity so far. In fact, there has been quite a slow progress in terms of the regulatory clarity so far. In fact, these norms were put out in December 2015. In 2018, somewhere in early 2018, the Government of India MOP gave a clear direction to CRC to come out with the regulatory framework for a change in law pass-through dynamics. We have seen very recently some progress in terms of the regulatory clarity, especially for the cost plus section 62 based projects. We have seen that the tariff norms are getting rolled out by CRC very recently in August 2020. While the discussion paper has been rolled out this last month in September by CRC for Section 63 based projects, which are competitively bid based projects. So we have seen a very slow progress and quite a significant delay in terms of providing a clarity, regulatory clarity in terms of the change in law pass-through, clarity in terms of the tariff implications for the FGD cost impact, and which is very much required in the financial environment market. Today we have seen number of difficulties, for the private IPP issuers to get the financing for the FGD, precisely because of the apprehensions on the change in law pass through by the financiers, and that's a serious concern. And that's one of the serious concerns. Apart from that, of course, many of these private IPPs have been facing a number of viability related issues, which Mr. A.K. Saxena has already pointed out, related to, and these viability issues are pertinent for a number of private IPPs because of the cost overrun, lack of long-term PPAs, exposure to short-term market, fuel availability related issues, promoter specific issues, and so on. There are a number of stress points in the private IPP segment, and the cost recovery for the FGD for these, private IPPs would be another big question mark, which Mr. A.K. Saxena has already pointed out. But more importantly, the regulatory clarity has to evolve on a fast track basis, and that would lead to more timely financing progress for a number of, the FGD projects which are there for the private sector entities. So that's second. And number three, more importantly, as I mentioned, the ultimate off-takers are the state-owned discoms, and the financial health of the state discoms is a big matter of concern. I mean, because of the COVID, we have anticipated, we are forecasting almost 5 to 6% demand decline in the current year. And that is happening precisely from the C&I segment, which is a cross-subsidizing segment. And that is going to lead to a massive revenue gap estimate of almost 45,000 crore, for the state discoms as a whole. And that would also require a very timely regulatory, true-up in the subsequent years. That will also require a timely tariff hike to the extent of, the regulatory gap which is getting created because of the massive demand decline, which we have been seeing in the current financial year. On top of that, the discoms continue to carry a heavy level of book losses because of the tariff inadequacy, high level of operational inefficiencies, and inadequate and irregular subsidy flows from the respective state government. So the structural reforms for the state-owned discoms is very much essential, so as to see the sustained financial track record, sustained financial turnaround of these entities in the long run. And this financial health would be a very critical factor to watch out in the long run, because these are the ultimate off-takers to bear the burden. And lastly, in terms of the financing environment, as I say, the financing environment has been relatively favorable, especially for the entities in the central sector, as Mr. R.B. Shai has also pointed out. That these projects in the central sector entities are a cost-plus based projects, and there has been a greater comfort in terms of providing the lending to CPSUs and entities belonging in the central sector, even though the regulatory clarity related issues are still pending. So there is more comfort, and I think lenders do not see that kind of apprehension. But the apprehension is quite solid when it comes to private IPPs, and that's where there is a struggle. And in fact, you can clearly see the progress in the private sector is very slow. Less than 10%. It's very abysmal, and that's in brief my highlight and my comments on this topic so far, Mr. Shai.
Thank you, Girish. I think it was very helpful. Do we have any more panelists, Saxena ji?
Yes, sir. We have Mr. Vikas Mehta from SED Fund.
But Mr. Vikas was not there. Is there now? Vikas, are you there? Then you are most welcome to make your points.
Yes, Mr. Shai, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Most welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. I think thank you to TERI to inviting me on this panel today. And good afternoon to everyone. And by the way, good morning from where I am on the East Coast of the US. So it's fairly early in the morning, so I hope that I can be cohesive in my thoughts early in the morning. Basically, I belong to the SED Fund, and the SED Fund is essentially a climate and energy focused foundation, and we support some initiatives in India focused on the energy transition. And frankly speaking, my ability to talk about this issue is not as deep as we've seen from the technical and policy focused panelists already. And the paper that TERI has shared as part of this this webinar already lays out a lot of the solutions and the issues going forward. So I won't elaborate much on them. But basically, when you see from a common person's point of view, it's been almost 5 years since we had this notification. And every single time there's been a discussion in the court or between the key stakeholders who are responsible for the progressing of this issue, we've seen continuous postponement. And when you also look at from a common person's point of view on the air pollution side, there has hardly been any improvement. The pandemic that we are facing right now has only exacerbated the overall situation. And the TPPs or the thermal power plants, while they may have their own distinct footprint on the whole issue of air pollution compared to, say, other sources that we keep on talking about more prominently, like stubble burning, transportation, and things like that. Let's not forget that when it comes to thermal power plants and the whole discussion around them, we keep on talking about cities like Delhi. But let's not forget that places like Singrauli or Korba actually have much worse sulfur dioxide and NOx pollution compared to, say, Delhi, for example. So I think in many ways, it's important to essentially talk about the right narrative when we talk about the pollution coming in from these sources, and to talk about the solutions which are appropriate, not just for urban pollution, but also for the rural pollution or pollution in tier 2 or tier 3 cities. When you look at from a solutions point of view, at least I personally believe that air pollution is actually both a technical and a financial problem. The fact that we are still burning fossil fuels and there is obsolete technology to kind of to burn them shows us that there is a technological problem. And the fact that there's little access to finance to replace it is a financial problem. And they both, these issues, they feed off of each other. So it's a chicken and egg situation, whether we get the technology first or whether we get the finance first to replace it. I mean, I would leave it to the esteemed panelists and, of course, the attendees on this to kind of negotiate or discuss that. But frankly, I think we have kicked the can down the road enough over the last 5 years. And we certainly cannot wait for another pandemic to essentially hit us hard before we can tackle the issue of air pollution. The final thing I would say is that if we truly want Atmanirbhar Bharat, we truly have to kind of look at health and environment to essentially ramp up our Atmanirbharta. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Vikas. Very, very important points. Very important points. 5 years, the progress has been very slow. Any more panelists, Saxena ji?
Sir, I think we have completed all the panelists' views we have sought. I think there are 3 questions in the chat box. If you try to look at the chat box, one question which was replied to by Mr. Bakshi came from Mr. Soni. The second question is about the compliance of the new environmental norms without implementing the new pollution control equipment or systems by procuring low sulfur coal or improving the operational parameters. That's one question. Another question is, why can't the central environment monitoring system data be made public in the real time? That comes from Mr. Rahul Jongia of Brookings. These are the 2 questions you may like to take on yourselves and through the panel members.
Mr. Bakshi, there is some question for you. Could you please respond?
Yeah, I had already, sir, responded to that. I had said that Mr. Suni has been, even when I was in CRC, he has been suggesting that the dispatch of power should be based more on emission levels rather than on the variable cost. On that, I had responded that since the implementation of emission control program has just started, it has not been implemented at a number of plants so far. So implementing it at this stage will not be possible. But at a later stage, when most of the plants have implemented this, then we can think of emission as a factor in load dispatching. I had already given, he had made a very good presentation. Actually, Osoko has done a very detailed study on how the costs will change if the emission is made, CO2 emission or other emissions are made the norm for dispatching of power. Obviously, the cost will increase substantially. That's what I have already responded.
Then there was a question to some other panelist.
So this is the one question from Maria Cheryl, whether the new environmental norms can be complied with without implementing the new pollution control equipment, say by procuring low sulfur core or improving the operational parameters. So this is what is there. I think anybody could answer if they want to.
So that's why for the new environmental norms, the whole discussion this afternoon has been that it requires the hardware, and 80% of the import of hardware has been or is at present from China, and you have some issue now in the country, and therefore that process inevitably then gets slow. Ajay Shankar made a very important suggestion that one of the responses could be that we try to find out what is imported and try to have the bulk order coordinated, like in case of LED that was done, and try to see how best the domestic manufacturing can be augmented quickly, and so that all these problems get over. Otherwise, if the dependence, see, our regulation is that has to be followed by implementation of these hardware equipment, and they have to be imported largely because our domestic manufacturing is not capable to that. Let's take, for example, solar itself, 35,000+ megawatt that we have done in the country. Most of it is imported. So now our domestic manufacturing of solar system is also being augmented, and it's taking time. So obviously, the implications are involved implication in the sense that if you also want to have Atmanirbhar, now that is the slogan, and if you want that, not that import is to be totally avoided, cannot be in the economy which is so interlinked with the rest of the world. But then at the same time, if the import is as much as 80, 85, 90%, then obviously it is a cause of some thinking within the country. So it will have to be. If you have to implement these norms, one is operation practices, another is certain hardware is necessarily to be done. If FGD has to be put, then FGD has to be put. But we also had a different type of perspective from our chief engineer from CERC, who made a very strong point that it perhaps might need a fresh look, whether in all cases we need FGD, whether in all cases SO2 is an issue, or it needs to be selective, which fuel we are using, which areas we are talking, how much of concentration of thermal capacity. Like a point was made by Vikas just now, Singrauli and Korba, highly polluted. Singrauli, Korba is big capacity, almost I think 15,000 megawatt around that in that area, Singrauli area, something like that. So obviously the implication is then it has to be selective. But then that is the way we make the regulation. The regulation is common everywhere. And if it is common everywhere, then it becomes applicable where you have one plant or you have 10 plants. It becomes like that. If you have to put, you have to put. I think that point is already answered by many of the panelists. Is there any more question by anyone or any comment?
Sir, can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
This is Sumit Sharma. I am working in TERI in the Air Pollution Assessment Division. So two quick points. One is regarding this low sulfur content in Indian coal. Well, I agree that the sulfur content is quite low in Indian coal, but if you see the volume of coal which is burnt in about in a range of about 500 million tons, then the overall accumulated SO2 emissions are quite immense, and they are in the range of 4,000 kilotons, which becomes almost 40% of total SO2 generated in India. The second point was regarding, the pollutant of concern in India is PM 2.5. So why we are worrying about SO2? I think there is a link which we are missing here is the link of secondary particulate formation. When the gases like SO2, NOx, they are released from the sources, they react with ammonia, and then they form PM 2.5 particles. So when you're resolving the issue of SO2 and NOx, you are not only reducing the impacts of these gases, but you are also reducing PM 2.5 concentrations in the secondary mode. And I think that is why we are pushing for these kind of norms, because it is the PM 2.5 which is at a very severe level in the country, and 30% of PM 2.5 in India is actually of secondary inorganic origin coming out of these precursor gases. Thank you, sir.
Any more point?
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, when technical experts remove my confusion also, because one I have one query regarding this secondary emission. Because the SO2 is released at a too much 35 meter, I was told by another expert that from 2010, due to effort in SO2, my ozone layer depletion being bridged by this SO2 has reduced. So it is another reverse which are observing the environmental effect can clarify this system whether some SO2 is also beneficial for ozone layer.
So I really don't think this is right, because all the emissions which are happening are in the troposphere close to the ground, but the ozone layer is something which is in the stratosphere, which is much above the height at which we are releasing SO2. So I don't think it can directly impact ozone layer. The only thing which it can act as a particle which can cool the Earth's surface, because it blocks the sunlight. So your surface can become cooler if you have sulfate particles in the atmosphere. But most importantly, it is a detrimental thing for our human health, and that is why we should push for its control rather than retaining it in the atmosphere.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Thank you.
Any more comment? Anyone would like to add, contradict, clarify, have a different perspective?
Yes, sir. I am BC Malik. Actually, during discussion, it was told that retirement of identified units, those have more than 2600 kilocalorie per heat rate. In this regard, the CA has already submitted one affidavit in Supreme Court for not to retire immediately, because we know that intermittent power of the solar and wind to absorb that thermal power is required to balance the grid. So during the in the 2022, our aim is the 175 gigawatt, and in 2030 it is further increased to 450 gigawatt. So that time we need the two-shift operation, or very a two-shift operation mainly, and the cyclic operation. So that time we may require this thing, this old unit to operate for evening peak or morning peak. So we made an affidavit in the Supreme Court to operate these units without FGD for few hours. That thing we want to clarify this.
All right.
Sir, there is
Any more
another
point?
Sir, there's one question from Mr. Ritesh Yadav, which is addressed to Mr. Malik. And Mr. Malik, if you could see the Q&A chat, the question relates to the chances regarding NOx emission limits getting increased from the current level of 100 mg per nm cube, and about the committee which has been formed with the CPCB and CA, and the readiness of NTPC and others for DNOx and other technologies. So, Mr. Malik, if you could please.
Yes. Actually, I told that pilot study already conducted in 10 numbers of NTPC power plant, where it is found that it is not successful. And any vendors, including DHL or GE, they have not come up with a suggestion or any retrofitting for to overcome these issues. So I think we are in the view NTPC and CA that limits should be increased to 450, but decision still is pending.
So I think this is all, sir. There was one question which I mentioned earlier from Mr. Rahul Tongia about the Central Environment Monitoring System data being published. I think this is a data which is received by the CPCB. They are the custodian of this data, and I think they are in the best position to reply. And of course, as users, we may want to be having the data. but I think CPCB, if we get an opportunity to interact with them, we will try to find out. But as of now, there are no more questions.
See, nowadays, I think air quality monitoring, just a second, it is my. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
See, nowadays, so far as the air quality monitoring is concerned for different places, a large number of places that keeps coming even on your TV screen quite often, this suggestion definitely could be made wherever there is concentration of thermal plants, not for A plant or B plant. Obviously, this request can definitely be made that maybe even regulatory commission could be approached to suggest to the authorities that or it is online available, people can find out. Somebody puts it the data and online it is. Many things Ministry of Power has been able to do in recent years on their website, like rural electrification and the rest of the things, many of the projects that's coming. So far as today's session is concerned, I think different perspectives have come. One thing is very clear, that there is no going back on these regulations, these norms, and but the only thing is that what we heard from Central Electricity Authority and from Central Electricity Regulatory Commission and others are also TERI studies. The question is, and Ajay Shankar made very important suggestions. The question is there a need to prioritize, considering also the fact that, see, these are the issues when these regulations or these norms are done, that is becoming very common everywhere, that we do the things and we do not pre-plan in a manner that what would be the constraints and what would be the difficulties and what would be the implications during implementation. I give you a simple example. Ajay would bear me out. When we were doing the tariff policy, somewhere in 2005-6, we had a section 63 and 62, and we preferred section 63 that everybody will set up new power projects only on competitive bidding. But then we also understood and analyzed its implication, because financing sector was quite not very positive those days, whether financing sector will support, whether private sector will be so bullish about this. And therefore we kept a sunset clause that yes, for 5 years, we could have public sector undertakings participating through 62 route on the cost plus basis. Of course, that NTPC later on in the final year, they did a thing which many people are criticizing. But question is that unless we also take into account the implementational aspects of our norm and regulations and all that, I think we face this type of problem. And cut a sorry figure, we need to realize and to be told by very eminent personalities that 80% of import is inevitable and could have been done differently, etc., etc. Therefore, while these norms could have been good to take care and to accept and to enforce, could there be a process of enforcement, implementation, and in so doing, could there be also the correct understanding and assessment of ground reality? If we don't do ground reality assessment and we do like this, then we yet again, and then there is no end to this yet again. Make these regulations only to look back, say do this, do that. I think I heard very loud and clear, CA has succeeded in establishing that a 10 to 15-year time phase will be necessary to complete implementation of this rule, which should also mean Central Electricity Regulatory Commission will have to appropriately review its regulation as is now is coming. I would agree that there are many things that are coming up in that way, the way they are coming because of the new developments. But there are many things which could have been predicted as developments and predicted as implications. I think some of the useful suggestions came that could we do local manufacturing of import components? Could we do bulk purchase of import? I mean, facilitate bulk purchase so that the prices come down. Ajay Shankar made that point. And then also focus on priority in areas where the level, because not only of SO2, because of so many, SO2 is not the only thing. that area is as it is highly polluted. Extreme step could be age of the machine, heat rate of the machine, highly polluted, not only SO2 but something else. So categorize these and also look at closing down. Today you are in a position, though a point was made by Malik that we need these plants, but I don't think, I myself was coordinator of a task force which was set up by the new government with Suresh Prabhu was the chairman. And we came to the conclusion that at that time, Central City Authority made a presentation that almost 29 to 30,000 megawatt of projects would be progressively over a period of 3 to 5 years be closed down. And that wouldn't have the impact the way that Malik was just now mentioning, because in the meantime, more power capacities have also been added. So you have huge capacity to progressively close down these power stations from the point of view of heat rate, from the point of view of this pollution, and pollution in not only terms of SO2 but others. I think we have financing. I think we who made that? Vikas made that.
Girish.
Not Vikas. I think Girish. Girish made that point that it has taken 5 years from the norms to regulation, and now also it is not fully complete, and that creates doubts in the mind, doubts and uncertainty in the minds of people who have to put the money. How do they do it? And DISCOM's state of affairs, how would DISCOM take care of this burden? These are also issues which have to be taken care of. I think a sum total of this would be a phasing out, prioritization, bulk purchase, domestic manufacturing, less dependence on import, and also compatibility of policy at the government level and regulation, so that there is greater degree of clarity among the financing community that they are getting it. Public sector can go ahead, 81% they have done, I made that point. They can afford to do it because they are sure they will get the cost plus. Private sector waits for final nod from the Regulatory Commission on change in law, and implementation of change in law is case-to-case basis, and therefore that takes its own time. Sometimes it goes to appellate tribunal, to Supreme Court, and that is how it goes. So therefore, compatibility and synchronization of this in terms of time is important if we have to enforce this. And these are not things which should not be discussed. I will say TERI, scientifically we respect. All our scientists, all our engineers we respect. But implementability and impact is important in evolving and framing these regulations. Because quite often these things go to the court and then another hassle starts. You have not done it without knowing that you were not totally responsible to have done it. But you have to prove that you were totally not responsible to have done it. So if the norm is there, you need to enforce, implement. And if you have not implemented for reasons beyond your control, that you have to prove in the court over a period of time. And these are also issues which should be taken into account, not only our conclusion on a scientific basis. So I think there are a number of things which need to be done. It goes, unanimity on the subject is that quality of our power stations in terms of emissions must improve, and there should be no compromise. But at the same time, ground reality of implementation must be taken into account. So I think with that, can we close, Saxena ji?
I think yes, sir. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot. And I think I will take this opportunity to thank you, especially sir, for chairing the session and giving your thoughtful impressions and leading the way forward and summing up the way forward so precisely. I would like to thank Mr. Ajay Shankar, Mr. Bakshi, Mr. Malik, Mr. Girish Kadam, Mr. Mengani, and colleague from SED Fund, Vikas Mehta. I think extremely thankful to all of you. I think we did a paper in February, and I think we intend to take this forward. The issues have come forward, and we are in touch with various entities, various organizations, and we will take it forward to place it on a better footing. The emission-based dispatch, which Mr. Suni talked about, and we also are thinking about it and trying to take into fold in our studies in this TERI. And we will be and are in touch with the POSOCO as well. And at some point of time, this will be a point for discussion, as Mr. Shahi, you had put it very clearly, and I believe that this is a revolutionary idea. and a concept, but we will take it forward this as well. At some point of time, if we have to talk about the prioritization of the air quality, I think that needs a consideration and the picture needs to be brought out in a better manner. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you all of you. And thanks to all the attendees who joined. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Thank you, sir.
all the panelists and all the participants. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ajay, thank you very much.
Ajay Shankar sir, I think Mr. Shahi